For almost all of human history, night was not the end of the day. It was something else entirely. We assume that ancient humans followed a simple pattern: work during the day, sleep when it gets dark. It seems obvious, logical. What else would you do without electricity, without screens, without anything to keep you awake? You would sleep. You would have to. Except that is not what the evidence shows. In 2015, anthropologist Jerome Siegel and his team at UCLA published a study that would quietly upend everything sleep scientists thought they understood about how humans were meant to rest. Siegel's team embedded themselves with 3 of the last remaining hunter-gatherer groups on Earth: the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. These groups live without electricity, without artificial light, without alarm clocks or smartphones or any of the technology we assume is responsible for disrupting modern sleep. If any humans on Earth were sleeping the way our ancestors slept, it should have been them. What Siegel found was not what anyone expected. These groups did not fall asleep at sunset. They stayed awake, on average, 3 to 4 hours after dark. They did not sleep 8 hours. Their average total sleep time was between 6 and 7.5 hours, significantly less than what modern sleep guidelines recommend, and they did not suffer for it. Rates of insomnia among these groups were nearly 0. There was no word in their languages that translated precisely to our concept of sleeplessness as a problem. So what were they doing in those hours between dark and sleep? To answer that, we have to understand what firelight did, and did not do, to the ancient human brain. Fire changes everything about the night. It does not simply provide warmth and safety, though it does both of those things. Fire produces a specific quality of light, orange, flickering, low on the blue spectrum, that interacts with human biology in a way that electric light does not. Neuroscientist Charles Czeisler at Harvard has spent decades studying how different wavelengths of light affect melatonin production. Blue light, the kind emitted by screens and LED bulbs, suppresses melatonin sharply and rapidly, tricking the brain into thinking it is still afternoon. Orange flickering firelight does something very different. It allows melatonin to rise gradually. It permits the body to begin its slow drift towards sleep, while the person remains conscious, social, present. Firelight created a biological in-between state. Not awake in the way we are awake. Not asleep. Something softer. Something the ancient world had a great deal of time to inhabit. Historian A. Roger Ekirch spent nearly 2 decades in archives researching what pre-industrial humans did at night, and his findings, published in his landmark book At Day's Close, Night in Times Past, revealed a picture of nighttime life that almost no one in the modern world would recognize. Before artificial light became widespread, most people in the pre-industrial world did not sleep in one long continuous block. They slept in 2 distinct phases, separated by an hour or 2 of wakefulness in the middle of the night. The first sleep began shortly after dark. Then, somewhere between midnight and 2 in the morning, people woke. They lay in bed, or they rose. They talked to their partners. They prayed. They thought. They visited neighbors. They had sex. Historical records suggest this was one of the most common activities during the waking interval. And then, after an hour or 2, they returned to sleep for the second phase, waking near dawn. Ekirch found references to this pattern in hundreds of historical documents: court records, diaries, medical texts, literature, across medieval Europe, Africa, the Americas, and Asia. The first sleep and the second sleep were simply how humans described their night. It was not insomnia. It was not a disorder. It was the default architecture of human rest. What happened in that middle interval was not nothing. The brain state that occurs during this waking period, after the first sleep, but before the second, is neurologically distinct. Sleep researchers have studied what happens when people are allowed to sleep in 2 phases without artificial light or time constraints. The interval between the 2 sleeps is characterized by elevated levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with deep calm and a relaxed, meditative state of awareness. People who experience this interval describe it not as anxious wakefulness, but as a state of unusual clarity. Thoughts arrive without force. The mind moves freely. There is a quality to the thinking that feels different from ordinary daytime cognition. Some historians believe this interval is when a great deal of human inner life happened. Prayer and spiritual reflection. The working through of emotional problems. The quiet processing of the day's events without the urgency of having to act on anything. A space between worlds that modern life has almost entirely eliminated. But the nighttime was not only an interior experience. Around the fire, before the first sleep and sometimes after, ancient humans talked. Anthropologist Wiessner spent years studying the Jew/Honzi Bushmen of the Kalahari, recording and analyzing thousands of hours of conversation across different times of day. Her research, published in 2014, revealed a striking pattern. Daytime conversation was dominated by practical matters: economic complaints, land disputes, food, tools, work. But nighttime conversation, gathered around the fire, was almost entirely different. Around 80% of nighttime talk was devoted to storytelling, narrative, the recounting of events involving distant people, imaginary figures, the spirit world, the past, the possible. Wiessner argues that this nighttime storytelling was not entertainment in the trivial sense. It was the technology by which ancient humans transmitted culture across generations, maintained social bonds across distance, developed shared identity, and expanded the imaginative capacity of the individual mind. The campfire was not just a source of light and warmth. It was a cognitive and social technology. It was the original media, the original classroom, the original theater. And something else happened in that firelit darkness that modern humans have almost entirely lost. They looked up. For the vast majority of human history, the night sky was not background noise. It was the primary source of navigation, timekeeping, and cosmic orientation. The stars tracked seasons. They guided migration. They told you where you were on the surface of the earth. Every major ancient civilization developed sophisticated astronomical knowledge, not as an academic exercise, but as a practical survival technology. The Polynesian navigators who crossed the Pacific Ocean without instruments were reading the stars the way we read road signs. The Aboriginal Australians developed one of the most complex astronomical knowledge systems ever recorded, encoded in story and song across tens of thousands of years. Ancient humans did not ignore the sky at night. They inhabited it. They also dreamed differently, or at least, they related to their dreams differently. In almost every pre-modern culture that has left records, dreams were not considered private noise generated by an individual's sleeping brain. They were information, guidance, communication from ancestors, from spirits, from a dimension of reality that was only accessible in sleep. The ancient Egyptians had professional dream interpreters. The Greeks built temples, the Asclepiae, specifically designed for therapeutic sleep and sacred dreaming. Indigenous cultures across the world developed elaborate systems for dream interpretation and intentional dreaming that persisted for millennia. The modern dismissal of dreams as meaningless neural static would have been incomprehensible to almost every human who lived before the 20th century. And then there was the cold. Nights in the ancient world, particularly outside the tropics, particularly in winter, were genuinely dangerous. Cold that could kill. Predators that moved in darkness. The group that stayed together through the night was not simply being social. It was implementing a survival strategy, the warmth of other bodies, the watch kept by those who woke in the night's middle interval, the alarm that human presence provided to animals in the darkness. Sleeping alone in the ancient world was not a choice. It was an emergency. The intimacy of ancient nighttime was not incidental. It was biological. It was structural. The night bound people to each other in ways that the modern, private, electrically lit, individually silenced bedroom has almost entirely severed. Consider what has changed. We now live in a world where the night has been colonized by light, where the biological two-phase sleep architecture Ekirch documented has been compressed into a single medicated, alarm-interrupted block, where the firelit hours of storytelling have been replaced by screen time that actively suppresses the neurochemistry of rest, where the sky overhead is invisible behind a ceiling of light pollution, where dreams are either ignored or consumed by an algorithm as content, where the social warmth of nighttime community has been replaced by the cold glow of a device held alone in a dark room. We did not evolve for this night. We evolved for the other one. This does not mean we need to abandon electricity and gather around fires, though there is evidence that even occasional campfire experience has measurable effects on blood pressure and stress hormones. What it means is that something about the modern night is running counter to the biology that was shaped across hundreds of thousands of years of a very different kind of darkness. The ancient night was not empty. It was full. Full of fire and story, of two sleeps and the luminous interval between them, of stars used as maps and dreams treated as messages, of the warmth of other bodies and the sounds of other voices in the dark. The question worth sitting with is not what we have gained by eliminating that night.